Well, as you'll know, earlier this week, Peter Ellis and once again the government said no to any kind of Royal Commission of Inquiry, or not even that, just another inquiry opening up this case because of the police evidence and how it was handled. You'll know the author Lynley wrote an award-winning book called A City Possessed. It won awards and raised more questions than answers about the handling of the case, and Lynley is with us in the studio. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Thanks so much for coming here to CTV News. First up, and this is quite interesting, you were telling me off air that it wasn't so much you were a great supporter of Peter Ellis in the beginning, it was more so the fact you decided to write a book, and as you were writing this book, it raised more questions than answers. Tell us about that process.
Well, issues that divide communities fascinate me, because both sides can't be right, so where does the truth lie? And my two previous books, one about Sylvia Ashton-Warne and one about Minnie Dean, both looked at all the arguments for and against and just found a way through and left people to make up their own mind. When I was well into researching A City Possessed, and normally I would write up a book of both sides are valid from their point of view, dear reader, make up your own mind. And I did put both sides of view in the book, but I couldn't pretend that, you know, I reached a point where I thought, this is totally nuts.
Do you remember that defining moment where when you were researching the book and writing the book and you thought, this is nuts? Do you remember that moment?
Pretty much, yes.
Explain it to me.
I'd have to go back. It was to do with the first allegation, which it was just very strange and airy-fairy and rather meaningless. And the cop who took it seemed very excited about it and wrote in his report, he is apparently a homosexual. So he was obviously regarded that as a serious matter.
Do you believe, and we discussed this a lot on News Talk ZB the other day, moral panic? Did that play a massive part in the downfall of Peter Ellis?
Yes, huge. I mean, when I was writing a book about Minnie Dean, people said to me it was a witch hunt. And I thought, well, what is a witch hunt? And I looked at the witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries, and there were stories of satanic rituals and baby eating and all these things. And then suddenly, here are these stories of satanic rituals and baby eating at the Civic Crash. So I thought, oh wow, I can study a witch hunt up firsthand.
Why is it then, do you think, that despite the fact this case went through the legal process, Peter Ellis was still convicted? He was still found guilty of these crimes.
Because when you get a moral panic, judges and juries and prosecutors and the general public are not exempt. They all think they're behaving rationally, but their moral compasses become so disoriented that they end up doing harm when they think they're doing good.
Lynley, for those perhaps unfamiliar with the case, and I suppose there probably won't be many that won't be familiar with this case, you talk about the first allegation being almost laughable in a way because it's so shocking. Is that the allegation regarding the colour of Peter Ellis's genitals?
Yes, yeah.
Because it was overheard that Peter Ellis had a black penis.
The child allegedly said this. I mean, we don't even know what Peter he was talking about, if he did say that. But he had a mother, the child who allegedly made that allegation, and he never repeated it in an interview with, you know, they had these tape-recorded interviews, and the kids were interviewed within an inch of their lives, but that child never repeated that. So whether the mother invented it or whether the child said it, and what it meant and what Peter he was talking about, given that, there was a dark-skinned Peter in the child's life.
What do you say to those who would suggest this has been through the court process, he's been convicted, give it up? What do you say to those people?
Well, there's plenty of evidence from other cases that our justice system makes mistakes, that it's unable to self-correct. I think one of the most egregious convictions, which was that Peter Ellis was convicted of being party to an offence committed by an unknown man in an unknown time and place. Now, not only did the jury convict him, that was upheld by 2 courts of appeal and a ministerial inquiry.
Hang on. So that doesn't make sense. How can you be convicted of an unknown what? Location?
Of being party to an offence,
yes,
committed by an unknown man at an unknown time and place.
Well, how does that make sense?
It doesn't make sense. But, I mean, even Sir Thomas Eichelbaum could find nothing wrong with the process. So
I was speaking to Peter Ellis's lawyer the other night, and he was saying to me on the telephone the reason why this continues to be denied by successive governments is because they don't want a bar of anything. It's got children involved, allegedly. It's got the word sex, it's got the word predator, paedophile, you name it. It's too icky for them to deal with. Do you believe there's some truth in that now, knowing what you know?
Oh, it could be. And all the people whose reputations are on the line, they've never had to admit they did anything wrong, and they're determined to keep it that way.
What do you think Peter Ellis's next avenue will be now? Because everyone's questioning why he didn't go through other court processes, but to get to the Privy Council, for argument's sake, is incredibly expensive, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, Arthur Allen Thomas had been to the Privy Council and he'd been to the Court of Appeal 3 times and had several things to the Governor-General. You can go around that endlessly. So it's no good saying he hasn't exhausted his legal options. You've never exhausted your legal option. You can always go back for a royal prerogative of mercy. But when it's so blindingly obvious, and a lot of judges will tell you off the record that it's nuts.
And it almost makes it even more frustrating, doesn't it? Because you've got all these legal professionals saying that off the record, but they can't say it on the record. We're out of time. Lynley, nice to meet you, and thank you so much for coming into News Talks. Where are we? CTV News.
Whatever.
We talked to you on News Talks yesterday, that's why.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.